So welcome back to another episode of Just Ink About It, the podcast all about tattoos, their history, their origins, what they mean. There will be interviews with some of my favourite artists all about their tattoo journey, their favourite style of tattooing, what got them into tattooing, and some funny stories they may have. In this episode we're going to cover daggers, and particularly daggers with flowers. So there is a great article from, I think it's called The Female Tattooist. I'll leave a link in the description below, and all the reference images are all from female artists, and you'll see them pop up on screen here. They are absolutely incredible pieces of work. So we'll start at the very beginning by dissecting the two pieces of the art, one being the dagger and one being the flower, which 99.9% of the time is a rose. So the rose itself is generally a sign for love, passion, courage, or beauty. And the dagger, on the other hand, can mean many different things. Most of the time, its origin kind of stems from protection, the right to protect yourself, revenge, lots and lots of different meanings, as I've said multiple times, particularly in TikTok videos. The more tattoos become socially acceptable, and more people get tattooed, they will place their own meanings on the tattoos that they get, so therefore the meanings change so much all the time. So the rose and the dagger tattoo. Firstly, I think the tattoo design came about because it just looks really cool. Aesthetically, it's just really pleasing to the eye. There's lots of balance, it's long, it's got a bit of bulk and a bit of weight to it. It fills a lot of spaces on the body really well. It looks great in black and grey, it looks great in colour. So I think that's probably the first thing to just get out of the way. I think when artists are, like, when you think like way back, when artists were developing their styles and drawing up new tattoos and new ideas that had never been ever done before, and they were probably drawing roses, and they were probably drawing daggers, and then someone just came along and put the two together, and we thank them for that. I think if we look at the dagger, and daggers and knives, as I said, they typically symbolise death, betrayal, protection, among many other reasons. A tattooist from Costa Rica called Natalia Gutierrez, she touches on the point that daggers might pay homage to some ancient cultures, as the knife or the dagger was one of the first tools that humans ever made, and it can symbolise thriving through difficult times. We often see daggers and hearts put together. This can symbolise, the loss of a loved one or the betrayal of a loved one. It can be a reminder of a past heartbreak. If you look at a lot of tattoos and just really dissect what they actually are, a lot of them are really simple and are really obvious in terms of like a dagger and a heartbreak. Generally, most tattoos will be along those same lines of very readable, very simplistic. Going back to a rose and a dagger, it might represent a duality and balance. As we said, a dagger can represent death or revenge, protection. It's cold, it's dark, it's rigid, it's steel. And then on the other hand, a rose is delicate, colourful, vibrant, soft, duck toilet moves, it flows, and it's very much the polar opposite to a dagger. So if a rose is representing, and flowers generally represent like life as they come to bloom, and if a dagger represents death, if a rose represents love, a dagger can represent, revenge, hatred, many other things. You can place any meaning you want on it, really. But I think the two together create a really nice balance, in both their aesthetic designs and, their potential meanings. Moving on from roses, and hearts, we often see snakes, or a skull with a dagger. Generally with a skull and a dagger, that's like, as I said, a lot of tattoos tend to be very straightforward with their design and the meaning of that design, and that dagger through a skull could represent, leaving a past life behind, a fresh start, being reborn, lots of like really straightforward, to the point, very obvious meanings. And a snake, on the other hand, can represent bravery, triumph, overcoming demons, overcoming tough obstacles. We see a dagger and a snake represented in a lot of military guys, tend to get that tattooed, particularly the knife penetrating the snake, or it has severed the snake. But when we see the snake wrapped around the blade, generally that is a reference to the Roman god Mercury. So if you are considering getting a dagger tattoo, particularly if it's with a rose or a snake or a skull, now you can have an idea of what some of those meanings may be. You can interpret those meanings whatever way you want to fit your story, your idea, your tattoo. You can place a whole different meaning on it if you wish. That's the beauty of tattooing. That's the beauty of art. It's subjective, it's individual, it's for you. So by all means, if you have a story and you think a dagger, a rose, a dagger, a heart, a dagger, a snake, a dagger, a skull, a dagger and a panther, whatever you think will fit your story best, or maybe it doesn't even need to have a story, maybe you just really like the design. Like 99.9% of my tattoos have zero meaning at all. They are purely for aesthetics, they purely fit gaps, they purely fill space. I purely want to put art on my skin. So tattoos do not need to have a meaning. So just bear that in mind. But if you do want to place meaning on it, these videos, this podcast, will give you a little bit of an insight to what some of the original meanings may have been, and then you can interpret that whatever way you wish going forward. So if you are considering a dagger tattoo, we would try defining the style. So like old school tattoos will have like bold, thick lines, like all traditional old school tattoos. They'll often be very simplistic designs. They'll often have bold colours. Those colours will generally be black, yellows and reds, bits of green in there, particularly if it's a rose. Those leaves are going to be highly saturated with green. The petal's going to be highly saturated in red or purple, or whatever colour you want to colour in your rose for that matter. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you are restricted to that particular style if you want this particular tattoo. You could go really simplistic with clean lines and a much more minimal, fine line, illustrative style, or you could go neo-traditional, which would be much more decorative and much more elaborate. And speaking of getting decorative and elaborate, consider the hilt of the blade with your tattoo. This is probably the one, like a rose is a rose. There's only so much you can change it. But the hilt of the blade is probably the one part of the entire tattoo that you can try make completely unique to you. You could place a gem in the hilt, and that gem can be a very particular colour. It could be your birthstone. It could be the birthstone of your mom, your dad, your sibling, someone who's passed away. So there's lots of little kind of details that you can place in the hilt that can make that tattoo really unique to you. You could place a skull on the hilt. You could place your zodiac sign on the hilt. There's so much you can do in that small little area that makes that tattoo unique to you. And think about placement. As I said, particularly when the blade, the dagger, is paired up with a rose or a heart, they tend to fill space really well, because the rose or the heart will be more of a round shape and add a bit of bulk, while the dagger will be long and thin. So the beauty with this is it's very readable, both big and small. If you want a rose in there, the smaller you go, the harder that's going to get, because it's a lot of detail crumpled into a very small space. So maybe think about swapping the rose for a heart or a snake or a skull, or dropping it out altogether and just going with the dagger if you want it quite small. And if you want it big, you can go as big as you want. And the beauty is you have all that space for so much detail, particularly if you want to add a lot of detail into the hilt of the blade, or the hilt of the dagger, with gems or some script or a skull or a zodiac sign or whatever it may be, whatever you can conjure up. The bigger the tattoo is, the more detail that can go into those areas, and the better the tattoo will age, last, all of those things. So the best thing to do there is speak to your artist. Try envision what you want your arm, leg, torso, wherever you want the tattoo to be placed. Try envision other pieces of art around that and how they'll fit, how they'll flow, and speak to your artist about that. If coverage is what you want in the long term, think long term, because the last thing you want to do is get a rose and dagger, or a heart dagger, or any variation of the tattoos that we've just mentioned in this. The last thing you want to do is get that place too big or too small or in an awkward area, and then when you go to get more coverage, it's kind of in the way, and it's hard to work around it. And it might even be the case that where your artist says, okay, so we have an idea of what we want in terms of like coverage, whether it be like a sleeve or a half sleeve, and it might be a case that you get a couple of other pieces first and then put the dagger in, and then maybe try and incorporate a heart or a rose and stuff with the dagger, depending on space. Or if you're dead set on a rose and dagger, you can pretty much place it wherever you want. It'll look great on the forearm because it's like long and thin. It'll look great on a calf because it's long and thin. It'll look great down the side of your torso because it's long and thin. And the heart or rose will add roundness and bulk, particularly in the middle. And then with the hilt being wide, it adds great balance. And this tattoo is all about balance in both its colour, its meaning, its shape, and its aesthetic. So I think that covers the rose and the daggers and hearts, daggers and skulls, and everything in between. So one thing I do want to touch on while we're on the topic of roses, if we drop out the dagger, flower tattoos in general, so if we just touch on other flower tattoos while we're on the topic of roses, we see cherry blossoms tattooed quite a lot. Generally they represent like springtime because they bloom in spring like most flowers do. They'll represent like purity and new beginnings. And the thing about cherry blossoms is they blossom before any of the leaves do on the trees. So they're just pure white, pure pink. There's literally over 100 different types of cherry blossoms that bloom in Japan. So there's lots and lots of different variations, but they bloom in a very particular way that makes them very soft and makes them look very soft and delicate and pretty, and that's why they represent kind of femininity, purity, a new beginning, a fresh start, and that's what most tattoos will generally represent, that because of just the nature of flowers, you know, how they bloom, how they grow, how you need to water them, nurture them, in order for them to strive. So just bear that in mind, that flower tattoos, you can place that meaning onto any flower tattoo, but some flowers generally have particular meanings attached to them. Anyways, as I said, the rose is generally love, passion, courage, and beauty. A cactus is for endurance. I think that kind of speaks for itself, the environment that a cactus, you know, grows in, strives in. They're really tough, they're really prickly. I think a cactus kind of speaks for itself. You'll see, I think most people that get cactus tattoos nowadays probably don't get them for the endurance meaning. They probably get them for that van life aesthetic. Just because they're very cute. They look great in like single line tattoos. Magnolia represents nobility. Carnations are often used in like memorial tattoos, because they often mean like a mother's love. So we often see magnolia. We often see carnations in memorial tattoos, particularly for your mother. A lily represents purity. Daisies represent innocence and loyalty. Lavender represents devotion. Lilac represents confidence. Chrysanthemum, I think that's how you say that flower. I'm not a flower type of person. They represent truth and optimism. A daffodil represents new beginnings. I think all flowers kind of represent new beginnings, but a daffodil holds that meaning quite particular to it. A dandelion represents happiness and faithfulness. Forget-me-nots represent remembrance. Again, we see forget-me-not used in a lot of memorial tattoo. Jasmine represents sensuality and elegance. Heather represents protection. Iris represents wisdom and hope. Holly represents foresight. Hollyhock represents ambition. So that is just to give you an idea of how many different flowers we see represented in different tattoos and what those meanings for each of those flowers may mean. And as I said, the more and more popular tattoos get, and the more people that get these tattoos, they will place their own meanings on these tattoos. Those tattoos will come with their own stories. They'll get them for their own reasons. For instance, if a daisy is your mom's favorite flower and you want to get a tattoo for your mom, a daisy is a really easy tattoo to get. And then if someone says, oh, what does your daisy tattoo mean? You'll be like, oh, I got that for my mom. Now that person thinks daisies represent mothers. You see how that happens? And that continues to happen and will always continue to happen, because that is just the nature of tattooing, and that's what makes tattooing so interesting, is meanings change so often. The more people get tattooed, the more meanings get placed on tattoos, and the harder my job of researching origins of those tattoos becomes. But I hope that gives you a little bit of an insight into floral tattoos, their meanings, and particularly when a dagger is incorporated into a tattoo, particularly with a flower. On TikTok, it was probably one of the comments that I saw the most, which was like rose and dagger tattoos, rose and dagger tattoos. So I just thought I would get this episode knocked out of the way first. So I want to just say thanks so much to everybody that followed on TikTok, engaged with the videos. I wasn't expecting them to blow up the way they did. everybody that, you know, told me to start a podcast because they wanted to listen to longer form content, everybody that told me to put them on YouTube because they wanted to listen to longer form content. I really, really appreciate the people that have already listened to the episodes of the podcast. I really appreciate the people that have subscribed to the YouTube already. So you can check out the YouTube videos. The link is in the bio of my TikTok account, and the link to my Spotify podcast is also in the bio of this TikTok account. The podcast will be available on other platforms. It just takes a little bit longer for those platforms to approve the content. Spotify just push it out immediately, so it goes on Spotify first because it's just the nature of the platform that's used. So just want to say thank you so much. Please check out the YouTube channel. Please subscribe to it. Please check out my Instagram. Please follow that, and please subscribe to the podcast, and I'll make many, many more of these videos, these episodes. That's my promise to you. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed yet another episode of the history of tattooing, the origin of tattoo designs, and I'll catch you in the next episode, coming soon.